Good morning. Greetings from the backyard. Welcome to my happy place. After a weekend of ribs and steak and a little bit of Waffle House breakfast this morning, wanted to jump on and say welcome to the Denture Design in 3Shape webinar series. I'm glad you could hang out with me for a bit. You either attended live and you're watching this as a follow-up, or you've purchased this to study on your own. But new this week, you can also have the option of purchasing the recorded webinars with a 30-minute one-on-one consult with me. So after you watch a recorded webinar, we can get on the phone and chat about any questions you may have or any areas you want to dig deeper. So again, greetings from South Carolina, and thanks for joining me on the webinar. And I look forward to talking to you. Let's have fun on our digital denture journey.
So the only thing I've done so far is set up the case, select my teeth, select my materials for the base, or the teeth. Okay, good, all good. All right. So I've selected my base material, my tooth materials. I've bridged the teeth together. So now I'm talking about how to get the scan data in. I would say most are coming in that a doctor has scanned with his intraoral wand. So in that case, I am selecting up here in the scan settings, digital impression. Sometimes that confuses because that's also the tool we select when the doctor's scanning like a tooth prep in the mouth, whatever. But because he's using an intraoral wand, I want to set that here, right, to let 3Shape know that's how I'm getting my data in. Now, if I was scanning it in the lab, if the doctor actually sent the denture with the wash over to the lab and we were scanning it with the lab scanner, I would select model here. And it's just a nuance of 3Shape. But when the scan suite comes up and we're going through the scan steps with our lab scanner, we change it there to impression. And that way the data is cleaner. I'm not sure why that is that way, but because most of the cases that we're doing is digital impression, that's what we'll work on. All right, so we've got everything set. Now we're ready to start. So I'm going to save the case by saying okay. And let that load up, lock go away, and we'll be ready to start. All right, case is set. Now I'm going to go get those scans. So import scans, and I've already got these prepared. Let's see, single arch reference. Yeah, so I've got the right folder selected, and it's asking me again, upper left corner of this pop-up. It wants the upper index or the upper scan, and there's my denture. Open that. Now it's asking for the antagonist or the lower. I could just double click on the lower. And then a bite scan. And he sent two separate bite scans here, so I'll just grab one of those. And you can either double click on these files or click on the file, then click open, same result. Notice that the icon now is an intraoral scan wand, reminding me that's how the data is scanned in. And once the lock goes away, we're ready to begin. So I will click next or design, and it'll open up the Dental Designer Studio. Okay, 3Shape is sluggish with the storm, I guess. All right, first step. All right, so you may notice that we have a few different things over on the left side, right, on the order. Typically, we don't have this many choices, but because we're bringing in an intraoral scan and because we're bringing in impression, we do have some other steps. And the first step, because we're bringing in an outside scan, is the 3Shape tool that allows us to clean up the scan, or we call this refining. And so refine upper jaw scan, and there's the toolbox, refine options. And, you know, sometimes there may be 5 or 6 of these blinking balls, or sometimes there may be 500 or 600 of them. It depends on the scan data and what gaps might be missing, what data holes. But there's 3 things that 3Shape can help us correct, and they are artifacts, holes, and borders. And I will typically select all 3 and then click refine. But before I do that, I've got to make sure I check this at the bottom, scan type. If you can see that down at the bottom left-hand corner, it says impression. I want to make sure I tell 3Shape now that the doctor has sent me a scan of an impression. So that's what that checkbox is all about. Then I can click refine, and 3Shape will go through its artifact removing tool, close any holes in the scan, fix any borders of the scan that might have a missing triangle. And this could take 10 seconds. It could take 2 minutes. It really depends on the quality of the scan and how the STL or how the DCM file is brought in. I haven't seen many that it won't fix, but occasionally you may have to take the scan back out, go into Mesh Mixer to close it all up. But pretty much the artifact tool or refine tool of 3Shape works pretty well. Just takes it longer on some scans than others, depending on the amount of data that the doctor grabbed with the scanner. You seem to be moving a little slower tonight. All right. So obviously you took a color scan, so that's one of the reasons the data file is so big. So I'm going to turn that off simply because I like looking at this. And clearly I didn't get an error, so it looks like it captured it well, and I'm ready to move forward. Now, this is just a single art, so when I click next, it's going to go and ask me, do I want to refine the lower jaw scan? Now, I typically do not do this refinement of the lower jaw scan because I'm not going to print this model. I'm only using this as my posing data to set my upper denture. But if I was going to print out this model, I would remove all these artifacts. But it will allow me to continue on without doing any of that. And we'll do that to save time to get into the nitty-gritty. All right, as typical, 3Shape in various steps, various tools, always wants us to tell it, where the arch is. So I'm going to move the lower out of my way. I'm going to set the occlusal plane or occlusal alignment by points. So you can see the toolbox that popped up, right? Occlusal alignment is where we are. Remember, it goes top to bottom. So I'm going to set with points, and that's going to allow me to pick 3 spots on this denture just to let it know this is where the occlusal plane is. And it does a pretty good job of getting the plane right. It's staying at the orientation, right? So let me bring it down, get it. What I'm trying to do is line up the centrals primarily. And this now tells 3Shape pretty much where we are as far as occlusal alignment goes. And that's good. So we click next. And now we've got another tool that we may not see typically unless we're doing this impression workflow, and that is trim upper and lower jaw. And so the way to look at what trim upper jaw is all about is to think about when we're pouring impressions in the lab, right? So this is an impression sitting on the bench, and I've got to pour it up in stone. When I first learned to do this, I was taught to do the box and pour method, which all it meant was I took a piece of red rope wax and I put it around and sealed it around the outer edge of the impression and just used that to keep the stone where I needed it to be. Sometimes we would bury it in some soft plaster on the outside just to really contain that and make it simple. But what we have to do is create a spline or a border here, not for our denture, but for our stone model. So that's what trim upper jaw is all about. We're going to tell shape where I want, the stone to terminate. Double clicked when I should. Delete that and start over. And if you notice what I'm doing is you want to capture all the good data that's there, any muscle connections, and as much of that peripheral roll area as, the doctor captured accurately. So I'm going to go over, 1 to 3 millimeters over the height of that border. And remember, this is telling 3Shape where the border of the stone is going to be. If you go way down the buccal surface of the impression, you're going to get a really deep trough in your virtual model, and you're going to have to just trim it away. So I get just over that border. I'm not sure how much reality data is back there, but I'm going to capture all of it I can. And let me skip back out the border. All right, so that worked out well. I want to show you something. Let me find a place on this impression. Now, this is what I'm looking for, right? I'm looking for that green surface, and the green surface is where my virtual stone will be. But notice this area as I was coming around, right? And it did get kind of wonky here. So you see this spline. I thought that might give me an error, but it didn't. But let me move this and see if I can make a mistake. No, it worked out well too. So it's funny you can't make it now. Moment when we want it did not work here. You can tell why I'm looking at this area. You can see the spline is disappearing. So there it went. So you see what happened? Now it's green everywhere. And that's what I call a leak. right, in my spline, and it typically happens in this kind of area, right? And my spline is either under a ledge of impression or it wrinkled over a fold in the impression. And you just have to come back and clean up your spline and look for those kind of areas. So now that's what I need. So look for those areas. Look for areas where if you pass over, like if I was to go over like that and see how the spline goes under that, that's probably going to give me an error as well. It does, so it covers everything green. So sometimes it's very minute and you have to really zoom in to find it, and you may have to go around it 2 or 3 times, moving different things until you find it. If you feel like you covered every square millimeter of that spline and you're still getting that leak, then that means somewhere under the spline, there's an open triangle that the artifact tool didn't see, didn't fix. And I won't work on it too long, but I'll try to fix it here. But if I can't, and it just won't go away, then that's when I'll start back over and I'll take the file into Mesh Mixer and make it solid and try to eliminate and then come back. So just clean up the STLs like we used to do. But that's what I'm looking for. So once I have that marked, then I move forward. And again, I didn't remove the artifacts on the lower, but I think it's going to calculate fine. I don't have to do this trim on the lower either. Because all this is really doing is telling 3Shape, where my model edge will be. And if I don't do this, the model edge is going to follow the edge of the scan. So, that means that the base of my model may have some wrinkles and bumps and, hilly spots in it because, that's the edge of the scan. But that's okay. So yeah, this is weird back here on the inside. That's just a bad scan or just didn't capture that data. That's not data we really need. So I'm going to proceed forward without trimming that to see if it will create the base. I think it will, but it's just unimposing. I don't really need it for anything. If I was going to print this model again, I would have marked it before and let the artifact tool work, and then I'd come here and I'd go around and just clean up that edge so that my model would look a little neater. But you don't really have to do that. You'll see in a second if it calculates. This model just will follow the line of that scan, which is surely up and down, but it's fine. Okay, let's chat. All right. Come on, 3Shape. The 3Shape dance. So reference dentures can easily be the largest part of what you do. Once the dentist starts to understand how easy it is for them to do this, right, and take those impressions and those records, and it is. It's very much one of the easiest things for a dentist to do is take a wash impression in a denture. And so typically that means if it's easier for them, then the records will be better. We get better records. The scanners, the intraoral scanners, do an awesome job of scanning the impression material. So that adds to the getting better records. And so this should be the most common way you do it because, again, most of the patients are this way. So, we really coach our docs up on, how to get a good scan. I use a 2-phase impression, and then the scanning is pretty easy if you use a polybalanciloxane. But now we're at the stage where 3Shape has taken that impression and turned it into a model, and it's turned it into the model and the bite the doctor gave us. So we're at our point where we are typically with a dental workflow where we can adapt the model. Right? And as I said before, what I'll typically do here is take my smooth tool and clean up these bubbles or rough spots in the stone that look like they may not be accurate. This is also the place where I can cut in my post dam, but I usually just make sure that my borders are clean. Remember, it's a smooth tool. It's not taking anything away. It's just averaging the height and the low spots to. And I just want to make sure I got a good clean spot for my border of my denture all the way around. And, any major bubbles are smoothed up. I don't mess with the root guide at this point. If I wanted to put a post-palatal seal in this denture, I could carve it in this model at this point. Smooth this up a little bit more. How far back I need to go. I think I can see it right there. So I'll be able to take my wax knife removal tool. Right, I'm just going to need a little more depth here. I can carry that bead line all up. All right, we can do that then. Otherwise, there's nothing else to do here. We can move forward. And let's see, the lower model closed fine. Yeah, oh, weird looking on the inside right there where that dent was, but and all these little, that's from the edge of the skin, but that's okay. So I will proceed forward, and now we're ready to get into the denture setting business. All right, we're checking our undercuts. Oh, sorry, I had to close the plane first. Let me bring up my reference denture. All right, and I'm going to mark this one with 3 points. Bite looks good. Already starting to see how beneficial the reference denture is. You know, again, not only it's so easy for the doc to acquire this data, but look at the data it's giving us, right? It's pretty easy to see where the occlusal plane, the buccal cord, the midline, and all that is simply by using the reference denture as our guide. So we set that. This much room we've got. Bring it up again. Okay. All right. Next step. Mind 3Shape, where the anatomical landmarks are. So remember, box on the left shows me the order that it would like that. Tuberosity and size of the patella, cuspid position, cuspid position. That will move to the next step, which is upper jaw boundary. That's my denture border. I got my pencil and just draw that. I told you guys last time I like to see it in the bottom of the valley, but if you want a heavier roll, thicker border, you just move this spline further out towards the edge of the mop. You can take into account your muscle connections at this point, or you can cut them later. You usually try to go up and around it a little bit, so yeah, I'm trying to minimize hand work later. All right. Border's drawn. And we're ready to move forward. And this delay between screens and steps, all relative to the amount of data in the scan and how much data you're adding to the case file. So the greater number of mouse clicks, the longer those calculating bars take. This is a screen where I very rarely do anything, guys. I typically click next here because I don't mind this undercut, right? This color chart's telling me that's between 0 and 1 millimeter undercut. At that perpendicular 90-degree path of insertion. Remember that in dentures, the path of insertion could be as varied as, 90 degrees. This guy could put this thing in his mouth in any number of directions. And this is just showing you where the undercut is at this direction. Typically, a path of insertion might be this angle, so we can set that from view and say, what does the undercut look there? There's no undercut whatsoever. This guy doesn't have any trouble getting this denture seated. You can play with that around. But honestly, guys, this is 2 screens where I really save a lot of time. The only time I must pause here is if I see a lot of the dark orange or burgundy. That's the only reason. Otherwise, maybe one other slight reason I would stop on the second step in this screen on the wax trimming, and that would be to check the ruga. If the ruga is real aggressive, I want to block that out a little bit. I don't really want to block it out. I just want to smooth. And in the analog world, I would just heat up wax really liquidy and just kind of flow it in there to soften these angles. So that I can do that with a smooth tool here and, set it at 30, 40 microns and just do a quick pass with the mouse and just kind of soften that. It's not really a block out, but it might help any discomfort this patient might have because of the way this thing fits. And if that tissue is that, contoured, then it's probably loose in some areas and flexible. If we put a rigid surface against it, it could pinch. So I'll just soften it up. But I don't do that very often either, only if it's real anatomical. All right, so now we're in the tooth setting phase. And 3Shape is going to look at, the library you pick. So let's go pick portrait. I'm going to pick the highly characterized digital portrait because we're going to mill these or print these. Show full arch. And it's going to take the data that we gave it as far as retromolar tuberosities, the size of the patella, occlusal plane, all that information to calculate a mold. It's going to suggest, and it suggested 12E. And so let's click apply and see how 12E looks. I think it's that lower. I don't really compare it to the lower, but what I can compare it to, right, is the patient's existing denture. Unless the dentist tells me that, the patient wants a bigger tooth, smaller tooth, or maybe they say they just want to show more, whatever. I've got this reference denture as a guide. So let's see some of these other things out of you. See how this looks against this reference denture, right? Obviously, I got to set it a little better. Not only does it help me pick the mold, but it helps me put the teeth in the right spot, right? So I start moving the suggested mold around mold. And at this point, if the mold is pretty close, and this one looks pretty good, 3Shape didn't always pick the mold was close, but it looked like it did. So now it's just time to fine tune it. And again, having that reference denture data is what makes this workflow so good. This is the dentures that you can train new people on. And if you're training a new two-setter, once they get the basics down, you can say, hey, I'm going to give you the reference denture case, and your job assignment is to go out and find a mold that's close to that patient's denture, right? And then set those teeth in about the same plane. The only reason that I would not set this in the same occlusal plane and same general setting of the reference denture is if the doctor said we need a lot of changes here. Maybe it's really, really worn and they know they want to open the bite. And if they want to open the bite, right, all I'm going to do is ask them how much. I'm going to bring up my articulator tool. I'm going to set the articulator, and then I'm going to come up here. Doctor may say, I want to open 2 millimeters. The only reason I do that is if the doctor says he wants to open the bite. I am not a big fan of opening the bite anymore because I've learned over the years that a lot of patients don't like it when it's they're not comfortable, they won't wear it. And so unless I'm told different, or unless the doctor takes a bite that's open here, I'm not going to open that bite. But if he does, that's as easy it is to do it. I'm typically going to just follow the guide of the reference denture. So they get the lower out of the way and start doing that. It wasn't really hard to get it close, but so remember the tools, the design tools are the 2 setting tools. I'm in the far left one, which is moving all the teeth globally. And so I'm trying to get close with the anteriors, and then I'll start working on the posteriors. So I'll go to one of the quadrant tools, and I will try to get that back section here, a little bit closer to where the patient is. Here. Here. All right, so that's pretty close. Then we'll just start fine tuning it. And that means, individual. Let's get back here for a second. Maybe tilt this down a little bit. Okay. All right. So now my lateral is not out there. But now let's go to the individual tool. You get this cuspid. I know a bit more. The central needs to be twisted a little bit. So you see what I'm doing here. I'm using the reference denture as sort of a template, or actually as a template to guide my setup. A piece of cake, I think it's one of the coolest tools within 3Shape, and whether it's rotating or just freeform float movement, and using linear tool, compass tool. This denture, obviously the lower denture is very worn, so kind of have a little bit of freedom here. All right, so you get the idea. Got it close now. But obviously, I've moved all these teeth around, so contacts are probably all messed up. Okay, pretty happy with that, but I've done some things here that got contact heavy. So before I start adjusting the contacts, I'm going to check something, and that is, what am I doing with the lower? And looks like I'm hitting it pretty hard in areas. So I will turn on my color mapping to get an idea. Now, realize how worn this is. Then again, I'm going to try to get rid of most of these blue areas, but I don't think I can do that completely with tooth movement, right? Because of the way the bite is and how worn the lower is. And if the doctor's not going to replace the lower, then I got to kind of play in that ballpark. So you can see that to get all that blue out of there, I could take it pretty much out of occlusion on the lingual, but I'm not hitting anything in the central groove. So I'm not sure that I would move it that much. I more likely would say, well, let's just do a little bit of movement and then start adjusting the teeth. So this would be where, compared to the analog world, we get our burr or we sit in front of the lathe and we start, knocking this tooth down. So I can come over here to the design tools and use the individual morphing, right? And start morphing these teeth a little bit to try to get some of that out. I don't have to get it perfect at this point because there is another step later where we can change the anatomy. We can bring up our articulator tool again, but this is what I'll go through. And it was pretty common with a single arch because we never really know what's opposing. And the 3Shape can look at it, but it's not going to hit it exactly. It can see the color mapping. It knows how hard that always confused me, right? If it knows how hard it's hitting to give me this color mapping, why can't it take it down for me? But it's giving us the creativity or the tools we might need to be able to set teeth and, get the occlusion where we know it might need it. So it's not totally automated, but this takes just a few minutes. Once you're rolling on this, you just knock it down and get most of these high spots out of the way. They sit on the language called those denture teeth. Another thing that we could do, right, is use scaling tool. I can scale that tooth like that. I can scale it like that. Or I can go back to my tools. Bring that cusp down. That cusp there, get that occluded. All right, you get the idea. I would try to get rid of most of these blue marks before I move to my next step, which is, all right, now that I've got the tooth positioned, I've got occlusion basically where I want it. The last thing I want to do is clean up the contact. So I'm in my individual tooth movement tool, and I'm going to start at my central. I'm going to right click on my central and bring the mirror plane, which brings it back to the midline. Then I'll go to the lateral, bring the mesial, cuspid, and just work my way back both sides, restoring the contacts. And remember, I'm bridging the posterior and anterior segments. So the contacts between the bicuspids and the molars, that's just for aesthetics, really. I mean, it's not going to really change the contact. Just be a bigger bridge joint if I don't do this. They're playing its lateral back in order. Now, I could also do, I could get as creative as I need to be. I like that. I could scale that back and just make it a bigger molar. Have to do right click, make you, it's lower, really not a good example because there's not a lot of anatomy there in that thing, but that was in crossbite, wasn't it? That patient. But if closing contacts really monkey with the occlusion too much, then I could just do the scaling tool and make a bicuspid slightly bigger or whatever. I don't want to do that a lot in anteriors because, we picked 22E or 12E for a reason. And I don't want to really create a mold. It's a lot different when the patient. All right. So I got my contacts in order and pretty much, let's just say I'm happy. I would get rid of those blue ones, but we'll move forward. All right. So it stops here like before. It says, okay, let's remind the settings for what you want your gingiva to be. And so I want my thickness on maxillaries to be 2.5. I do want to have the 0.15 or 0.10 of relief. And then the gingival aesthetics. If you remember all the parameters for pillow length, root eminence, gingival roll, all those things we have control over. And there's 3 kind of default settings. And then the 4th you can set in your control panel, which we'll go through in the 4th webinar. I've already set mine up called JStegall Wax Up, and it's basically their intense or anatomical design. So all the things that are matched to the intense design show up if you just hover over the slider bars. But what I did was I took the intense and tweaked down the papilla length and width a little bit. So I just clicked on that button and it resets it. So if you see the bars change, right, based on my settings, but you could customize that to your heart's desire. So make sure that's done. And you also could change your border. Let's say that, I said, I really don't need that denture that far back. And I could redraw my spline further up or, tuck it in more here, but that looks okay. So we'll move forward and now we'll get into our contour settings. contour and shape settings. While that's calculating, check the chat box. All right. So if you remember from last time, the next sections, which is the second and the real design part, are the real anatomy part of the smile composer. So the first place that it starts is with the connectors. So that's my bridge joints within each segment. And because I have 3 segments, then we've got to go through this 3 times. So that's highlighted connectors. And here's my pop-up box connector settings. And if you remember, I went in my control panel and I set this to the minimum that 3Shape will allow. So on the facial scale, the lingual scale, and the center scale is the minimum, which is 70, 70, 60. I think the default is 80, 80, 90, and that makes the joints too big. For a printed segment, a mill segment, you don't need the joints big. I just needed to hold it together. So I don't want to see them, so I want them as small as I can get them. So 70, 70, 60 is automatically pops up in my box. Most of the folks I trained at 3Shape is a default 80, 80, 90. And if that was the case, then I'd have to sit here and type in 70, 70, 60 on all 3 segments. But because I've got them automatically, then I'm just going to click next and it will go to the next segment, which is my anterior segment. And if you remember, the 2 slotted bars over on the right, 2 circled in blue, is the one I'm working on, the segment I'm working on, and the other 2 is the other 2 segments. So if you ever wanted to just focus on what you're working on, but I just click next 3 times here for each segment to make sure the connectors are where they need to be. 70, 76. All right. So the connectors are right. And so now it's saying, okay, you want to change these teeth in any way, right? You can tell easily which segment I'm working on, right? You can tell with all the morphing heads. So if I wanted to do some more work, right, on these teeth, I could add more occlusal grooves. I could actually, carve the connectors back some more. One of the things I do on this step is to take the model away and see if I have any intaglio breakthrough. Block out wax lay, and I don't see anything. Right? So that's good. But this is about, in a single arch, this is about the only thing I'm going to do here. So let me bring the lower up. Let me bring the articulator back up. And I can see I'm out of occlusion back here. I probably would go back and reset those a little bit. Let's be efficient. So I can remember that pretty well. And drop it down a little bit more. All right, so watch what happens now. So I've got my articulator set. I'm going to go up here to my articulator settings in the upper right corner. Right, I'm going to click on that box. And that changes the tools underneath. And so now you can see this little play button. I've got some settings here. And this is the excursive movements. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to run it. I'm going to hit the play button. And you'll see the articulator or the model going through movements. And you have control over what these movements look like, how far they go, that kind of setting that you might want. It's got a face bow, or the doctor sent you some settings from a specific articulator. You can certainly enter those here. But my main goal here is to do exactly what I would do in the analog world of a finished denture, remounting it on a regular articulator and putting the occlusal paper between it and tap. I'm looking for those marks, and we're all looking for those equilibrated marks. So I can look at the lower or the upper. It's still going. It's moving slow. Right. You can see that I've made some marks. I can even turn the articulator off now. It's still there. I'm just not looking at it. So you can see that I've got a couple of good marks over here. I think we use the lingualized occlusion, so I should only see them on the lingual, but I'm not hitting it all over here. Not sure we will because of that wonky bite. But let's say I want to equilibrate that more. What do I do? Well, what would you do in the analog world? Right? You take a burr and you start smoothing down these little spots a little bit. And so that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to say, look, I want you to remove about 0.25 from these spots. So I change that number, got contacts to 0.25, click Adapt Designs, and then I hit the play button again. And while I don't have the lower up there, it's actually going through the excursions, and you can see that the marks got heavier And as it continues to go through those excursions, you'll see those marks show up in all the different spots. And what I'm hoping to see is a more equilibrated look, obviously, right? Just like I do on a regular articulator. So we're actually, grinding down, we're adjusting these denture teeth at this point. With a single arch, it's a very common thing and I would do it. I do it almost on every case now, but absolutely going to do it on a single arch. So we got a little bit better equal contact. Still don't have anything on this side over here. So maybe I come back and say, let me up that a little bit more to maybe 0.4 and hit Adapt Designs and run it again. And so you can see I'm really getting some good hits on the other side. And that's what I'd be looking for on the left side. But here's my rule of thumb. If I'm not getting the equilibration I want after 1 or 2 passes of these excursive movements, then I realize that, hey, my setup's not good. I need to go back and work on that a little bit. I go back and morph the teeth a little bit and move the teeth a little bit, anything to try to get that balanced occlusion or balanced equilibration. But so, maybe I can turn the morphing tool on from here. So then again, I'll bring this back up. And again, I'm not going to click the Adapt Designs button. Let's run it again without adapting the designs. I think that I'm not going to make any headway over here because it's cross bite. Nope, starting to get a little bit on the bicuspid there. So you get the idea. Now what I would do is I'd hit Adapt Designs and run it again. So it's going to take a little bit more off everything to try to increase that and maybe get those molars in play. But that is what you just watched there is the answer that I give when somebody says, how do you remount a printed denture? Well, I don't. This is what I do. I make sure I do this in this sculpt anatomy step, right? So that I'm basically getting all my equilibration done right here, right now ahead of things. So what happens, right, if we close this out now and go back to our sculpt stage, you'll see, you look close, you'll see that those areas have been flattened off. Right. So it's just like taking a bird to it. All right. So sculpt anatomy's done. I could get as creative. If I'm using a library that doesn't have this kind of facial anatomy in it, I will actually put some of this in it because if you have to print teeth, you really need some highly characterized anatomy on the facials and anteriors to make it look good. But that's why I like the Dentsply Genios and Portrait. They have that built in. We're good with our sculpt anatomy. We can, again, it's going to go through 3 steps of this because there's 3 segments. But if we're happy with our teeth at this point, then now we're at the sculpt denture base. It's showing me that I'm a little thin there. So let's make my wax knife pretty big. You just add some wax in these areas. This is an area, well, I don't want to run any risk of fracture, mid-palate area. But a lot of this red, I don't really worry about because I'm adding 0.5 microns or 50 microns with wax. And that's not much. But, this is where I also could get creative if I wanted to, add some more anatomical features here. If I wanted to say, hey, let's add smaller muscle connection on the denture, bring that roll out a little bit more. I wanted even more root imminence. I could do that, pulp that out. Okay. But it's not going to do a lot. And I know that some may say that it really looks weird, all the root eminence, but it prints really good. Let me smooth it all up a little bit. Always check the lingual. 3Shape's really not ideal sometimes in this area because of the tooth libraries. So I will morph the wax here a little bit more, less of a deep drop to the bicuspid. And then finally, I'll check, make sure my pupillas aren't too far off. Usually you'll see them a little short in the posterior. You've heard me say this a lot. We don't try to make these perfect here because, when we bond these teeth in, we can kind of correct any mistake that we might make in the design. If we make them too perfect here, then this creates a bigger mess when we're seeing teeth. Well, I saw something that looked a little weird there. All right. Last thing in my wax up, of course, are the lovely T-bars. Go to our attachments. Set from the heels and view direction. add one, and that gets it pretty much in the right orientation. Just drop get it between those bicuspids, 3 to 5 millimeters away from the pockets. It's good. And put it in and back out. Make sure I'm not quickly screwing. And then make sure I'm really connected on all 3 points. So we'll leave it short here. Once I am, you click apply. We went through the other tools here on this, like adding the patient's name, adding stippling. We could do that if we wanted to, but let me say this. So the T-bar to someone like this one. And set the denture this way, set from view. Drop it in place. This one should be between the molars. Pretty good. Yeah, it's the fastest T-bar I've ever done. Here come the teeth. Okay. All right. Where are we? 24. All right. And if you remember, I said we're going to move these to 1.5 hours, so 8 o'clock is my cutoff. But next step, coupling mechanism. It's going to go through each section. This is the path of insertion. Went through all of that last session. 1 segment, 2 segments, all good. Again, another reason I like segments, you have very little issues here. You do it in a full arch design, lots of issues here. Now, I have an issue. I think that's good. Show you what happens. I'll click yes, and it went anyway. It must not have been too big of an issue for it, probably because it's a bridge segment. But sometimes you'll get a blinking handle show you that your contact, it actually tells you the tooth numbers, neighboring teeth. So it's probably that connection right there, but it is allowing me to proceed. So we're going to proceed. See if we all get that manufacturing error, but I don't think we will because it let me proceed. Normally, if it's too much of a contact issue, it won't let you proceed and you'll have to go back and smooth the contact down. All right. So that calculates, we create the STLs and we're done. So that's a reference denture workflow. And, went through some of the tools again. All right. So questions. All right. So a couple of questions. Ashton says, can you have a preset like you do for the gingiva for the connectors? Yes, you can. And we'll go through the presets in the control panel in session 4 if you're signed up for that. If you're not, just send me an email and I'll send you how to do that. Our adapt design button is always grayed out. How do we activate it? If you click on it again, it goes on and off, and it's really hard to see. On mine, the colors are hardly noticeable. So I'm not sure that it's always grayed out. But you have to run it first, and then you have to set your number and then click the adapt button. All right. So we won't go through the complete design on the immediate. I just want to show you the immediate tools, how we get that started, get that in there. All right. So we're done. Looks like it captured pretty well. No errors, and we can go generate our STLs and print them up. Print the monolithic or print the file, either way. Okay. So let's finish with the immediate. So let's start another case. My file is an upload. Do the same thing. Select either PMMA or use the Risotone resin. Getting a couple of new resins to test for some other folks. So be on the lookout on social media for that. The Rodent folks have one that I'm excited about. Sega's got one coming out. They're working on their final FDA validations. Bridge. All right, same setup, exactly. Kind of how I set almost every denture I do. In this case, I'm going to be bringing in models. And so 2 options here with my scans. I would tell any dentist you had with an intraoral scanner that if they want to do immediate case, they should scan intraorally with their wand. If they don't have a wand, then obviously take an impression. But if you have an intraoral scanner, you really shouldn't take an impression because the data is just too valuable, too easy, less hassle on the patient. And it's very simple. The scanners are really good at capturing teeth. The more teeth, the easier it is for the scanners, but the same as any other scan. We scan the upper, we scan the lower, we scan the bite. And you just have to manipulate the teeth to the bite. If there's not enough teeth to do that, then you have to put some putty or wax in between the teeth and bring the patient down to the bite and scan that. And intraoral scanners will stitch all of it together, and it gives us the bite information we need in the lab. So, but if a doctor does take a model, write our impression, when you pour the model, don't cut the teeth off immediates, right? And clinically or lab, we should never cut teeth osteal models anymore, because once you do, that data's gone. Right? This is a big section in my clinical program, and I really try to drive it home with the docs. And look, it's very important that we really want to do our immediates digitally because of the data that it retains. So, I've picked on the materials, and I'm going to say, Dr. Send an impression. So I'm doing a model, and I'm going to put that model in the scanner with all the teeth on it. Don't take the teeth off. Now, if the doctor does have an intraoral scanner and they scan the upper and lower and bite with the intraoral scanner, so they send you digital scan files, then again, I'm picking digital impression. And so digital impression says, okay, you're getting it from an outside source, digital impression. Now I got to turn it into a model for you. So we go with model here, because we just went through what the digital impression looks like. The digital impression gives you the chance to draw the border for the model and all that. The one thing that's different, though, when a doctor puts an intraoral scan wand in the mouth for an immediate denture, that bottom right left-hand corner where I check the box that says impressions, that's on the artifact removal screen. I don't check that because it's not an impression he's scanning. It's a tooth in the mouth or an arch in the mouth. So that's the only difference. But in this case, we're going to scan a model. Just calculate it for me, 3Shape. Right, we go import that scan. I click my scan button. Immediate upper. Let's cut the right one. Yeah, it's an upper. All right, so yeah, there it is. Visual scan, color scan, good data. All right, so we can go next, our design. So now we're in kind of a normal denture workflow. First thing, 3Shape says, what's the occlusal plane? So again, 3 points, then line it up. All right, so if I hit next, it's going to the section where every denture workflow says, hey, where's the tuberosity? Where's the incisal pillar? But wait, all my teeth are still in the way. So what I have to do is I have to go back that step. Do you remember last time we talked about going back a step, right? From the occlusal plane step to the model preparation screen. We're going to work on that upper model a little bit. So this is the get your saw blade and e-cutter out and take the teeth off step. All right, so what I'm going to do is come down here to the toolkit and look for this red X, which is virtual extraction. I'm going to turn that tool on. So in that tool, right, I have some options down here. Auto tooth detection, apply automatically, and play button or apply button. So what do these do? Well, if I've got both of these checked, when I click on a tooth, on the occlusal view of a tooth, it should remove it and it should reduce the bone a little, right? And this works pretty good if the tooth is sort of a standalone tooth. And I can just do this, if the teeth are separated from each other. Where this tool struggles a little bit is when the tooth is adjacent to another tooth. So when I click on this cuspid, it's going to try to get rid of it, but you see it kind of leaves all this flash. And then if I go to that lateral, it really starts to get confused. And this just exacerbates, right, the further you go when teeth are adjacent. So I do any individual teeth, and then I pause and say, I'm going to come back here and turn off the automatic application. Then I'm going to click on the cuspid, and it will try to recognize where exactly the cuspid terminates all the way around. So you can see the spline that it creates, and I can customize it. I can take it a little bit further, and I can get as nuanced as this as I want to be. How much tooth do I want that to cut away? And then I hit that apply button, and taking that data, it'll take that off. But look, it still left that flash there because that spline went up and over, and you can't go between it like floss. So there's a couple of ways to tackle this. If I go to the next one and do the same thing. So now when I click the lateral, I'm going to go spline, but look, it's going to go up and over that. So what's the easy way? Well, if it's not too many movements, I will take time to move this. But this doesn't always calculate as it should, and sometimes get caught in the weeds here, but let's just see how this is going to do. All right, let's see if that applies. Yeah, but it's still left a hot mess. So what do we do here? So if I take that cuspid out, And before I go to the lateral, if I will jump back to my wax knife tool over here on the left, take my smooth tool, and just smooth that contact down a little bit. That's all I'm doing. Now I'll jump right back to my virtual extraction tool, click on the lateral, and it actually gave me a better proposal. It's only going to go so far in here, right? So when I click apply, right, I now got a much better separation between the lateral and cuspid, right? But now I have this on the central. So what I'll do is I'll jump back over to my smooth tool, and I'll take that down, and then go back to my virtual extraction tool, put on a central, and now it's really weird because it's looking for a line of demarcation. So at the end, all the tools are there. Right click on the spline, fast edit line, right, and draw it, and click apply. And like that. So that's probably, sometimes this can be a rabbit hole that I just hate, right? So let me show you some other tools to do this. So if I've got a lot of teeth like this, right, I could say, let me detect that and let me try to change this on. Let's try to take several teeth off. But you see what happens. It really, if you're not careful, your mouse goes everywhere. So another way is that if I've got the room to do this, right, and I want to cut the back heel of my model off, so I have to be careful with this, and that is that other tool here, the plane cutting tool. And I can take the plane cutting tool, and I can draw, plane through there and knock them all off with one go. And then just come back and refine the bone. Pretty handy tool to use if the doctor told me he's doing some bone reduction, and a pretty quick way to get rid of a lot of teeth at once. So then I just got to go back to my wax knife tool and just start smoothing things down, reducing things down some more. I like the individual tool because you can see the socket that it leaves me is really closer to what it needs to be. Plane tool, depending on how well I can get that plane, but I can reduce this down just like I do with the burr. Just think of this as an e-cutter on a stone model, right? In an immediate case. You could go back to the virtual extraction tool and see what happens. And kind of recognizes it as a tooth, but it didn't happy. And apply. Let's see if they get rid of it. Yeah, so it did better. So you can see, okay. So you can see that I wanted you to see all the different tools of getting rid of the teeth. Once I get the bulk of the teeth off, whatever tool, and I really just spend a little bit of time with my wax knife tools and get these sockets down to, whatever I think's appropriate. It really depends. Maybe the doctor gave me some indication of the health of the bone. I can always bring back, if I've got any data like this, I can bring back to see, okay, where was that central root again? Where was that lateral root again? To, kind of guide my reduction. Hold her down a little bit more. All right, so that's the bulk. So I've taken my whatever I've done, I want to smooth it. So I'm going to make my tool pretty big, and I'm going to smooth that down. All right, and so what I have, right, is an edentulous upper arch, and I can go forward and not do anything on the lower. So I go forward. I've set my occlusal plane. Right. Can draw my border for my denture. Probably would run this one through Model Builder and try to get that base a little bit extended, or not a lot of great data here, but it is an immediate. All right. So this is that good indication of, right, where's that spline messing up right there. This is where the good designers of you out there can tell me, where's this thing messing up? See a wrinkle? I don't see a line anywhere going under. Okay. All right. And that's for another time to solve that problem. It's probably a bad scan is probably what that is. So the cool thing about the workflow, and now we've got this model of edentulous, right? It's like every other denture workflow, right? I'm not doing anything different in the screens following, right? I'm picking my teeth, I'm setting my teeth, but the one change that you will see is in the upper right-hand corner when we get to where we're setting teeth. there will be an additional slider bar. And the additional slider bar is for your extracted teeth. See if I can make them pop up here. Yeah. So when we start taking the teeth, right, we start setting the teeth, I can turn on the extracted teeth anytime. So if I'm picking, videos, right, so I have my extracted teeth, that'll help me with shape. It helps me with position, just like the reference denture. And so having those extracted teeth visible to us will make us create the best immediate setup we've ever done, because that's data we just don't have on a stone model with the teeth cut off of it. This is why I tell dentists every day, do not take an impression and let the lab do it traditionally. Tell them you want it done visually so that that data will remain. Or better yet, you have an intraoral scanner. Don't take an impression at all. Just get your wand in there and scan those teeth. That way in the lab, we have the ability to turn those things on and off at any time while we're doing this virtual setup. And that's our guide. That's our directive, right? That's easily identifiable for occlusal plane, buccal quarter, midline, and size of ledge, tooth size, shape, position. All the data is right there, and we can turn it on and off anytime we like during our setup. And other than that, it's like every other denture setup that we do. But the reference denture and immediate denture, having that extra layer of data to use at any time during our setup is really a godsend for our virtual setups. I think it makes us more consistent and makes us better, certainly makes us faster. That's it. Immediate dentures. And I'll go ahead and close this so I can see the screen to answer questions. I'll save that on this. So you can turn your mics on. If you want to ask a question, you can enter it in the chat. If you have any questions now, I'm going to send in the chat a link to a Google Drive folder. If you'll click on that link and save it, that is the folder that I share with all the trainees and all the training classes that I do. And there's lots of resources in there that you may or may not need, but what is in there are 2 videos of me going through the reference denture and going through the immediate denture workflow. So you can, if you forget it and want to look at it again, I go through the design start to finish on both the reference and the immediate denture. And those are just screen grabs of me in 3Shape, doing those 2 workflows. Those are at the end of that folder, but there's lots of other stuff on that folder as well. So grab that link to that Google Drive folder so you can have that access. All right, I'll go back to the chat, see if there's any other questions. Okay, Daniel says, is Dent Supply libraries are grayed out? The libraries, you have the loose tone system, you get the libraries for free. All you have to do is ask your rep to have them activated. He will need your 3Shape dongle number to have that done. He submits that request to Dent Supply customer support. They forward the request onto 3Shape, and 3Shape then activates them or turns them on. That usually takes somewhere between 4 or 6 hours. Never had it take longer than 24 hours. And once they're activated, then they won't be grayed out anymore. You may have to go into 3Shape and do a dongle update, an internet update, so that your dongle recognizes the fact that they've been turned on, and then go into the download section, and they shouldn't be grayed out then. Pretty simple process, but it does have to go through those steps. 3Shape has to activate them, and that's kind of the way they protect the libraries. Again, they give them to you, right, if you bought the loose stone material, so they're pretty easy to get. When you do get them ungrayed out, make sure you download them at night, because they're very big files, and if you try to do it during the day, it's going to slow your production down. Another question. Same with LDT resin. Yeah, anytime you download any of the libraries, you get all the material files for the base resin and the value resin and the tooth resin. And so just download one library and you get all the parameters for all the materials. So the carded tooth library is called IPN Portrait Inspired. Those are free. Anybody can download those. Those won't be grayed out on anybody's. If you just want the material files, you can download the carded tooth library and get that. Let's see, another question. Do you use the cut plane tool, desired distance from antagonist much ever? It's in the anatomy tool near the end. Ashton, I use it in Crown and Bridge. I don't think I've ever used it in a denture because, especially with a single arch, there's so many variances in that occlusion. I'm not sure it's going to calculate the way I would want it, so I don't typically. And upgraded to 23, so you have the try-in workflow now. That's cool. We'll go through that next webinar session. I like 23. It's not without its bugs. Never had a version of 3Shape that didn't get buggy at times or didn't slow down, but okay. Seeing any others? All right, guys. Thank you for hanging out with me. Appreciate you attending. Remember, I am now doing my own thing with Here to Serve Dell. So if I can help you, please call me. We can do one-on-one training. But otherwise, you got my email. You can ask me anything once you guys come. You're kind of in the in crowd, so you'll get all the emails and whatnot, anything I send out. And again, you have a year's access to the recorded version of this. So be on the lookout for that email. It will take me about a week to do the editing of the video and get it posted. Thanks, guys. Have a great night.
That was fun. Look, I understand, guys, the struggle's real. Finding removable text, training folks, getting the work out the door, it's all a problem for us today. I believe digital workflows are tools that can make things more efficient and certainly allow us to do more. And I'm here to help, whether it's coming to your lab to train your techs, your office to train your staff on better scanning, or speaking to a group of dentists on the clinical steps necessary for success in the digital denture workflow. I am here to serve. For more information on my services, upcoming events, or to contact me directly, jump over to my website, heretoservedental.com. That's heretoservedental.com. I look forward to seeing you again.